Today on a special muscle car search and restore edition, it's stage 2 of our Project G-Machine Giveaway Monte Carlo. One lucky winner gets to drive it home. But first, we want to take this flippy-floppy frame and turn it into a diamond-tough foundation for this big bad Chevy. Also, Ian from Xtreme built us a full float rear and learn what components make a stock-style tranny handle over 700 horsepower.
It all started with a concept. Take one of the lesser-known muscle cars from the classic muscle era, give it a top-to-bottom makeover, and then give it away to one lucky viewer. This 1970 Monte Carlo has a ton of potential, but it's going to need a pile of work. The interior, vinyl top, puny little small block engine, paint, and most of the chrome were shot. But if you look underneath all that tiredness, you might see what we see. So with the help from horsepower, we tore it down and pulled the body off the chassis, then built a 500 horsepower LQ4, so we're off to a good start to our giveaway Monte Carlo G-Machine. Hey guys, welcome back. Today is chassis and suspension day, and as you can see, we're about elbow deep in an old school muscle car, taking it from greatness to beyond.
Now we're going to get started with some pretty extensive frame modifications. Now this thing's already been torn down and sent to the blasters. Here's a look at how all that went.
With a hand from one of our techs, it goes by the name Trucker, we dropped the frame and the rear end off at Blast from the Past in Lebanon, Tennessee, so that they could get after him and knock off all that old cruddy stuff. Now this frame may be clean, but it has a couple of issues. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Now this old chassis's got quite a bit of flex to it, and for the type of car that we're putting together, well, it could use some more structure. And I know once it's bolted to the car that it does add some, but for that type of ride, we're gonna put a little extra in it.
We'll start by boxing the original frame rail on both sides. Then we'll add another inner frame rail from there all the way back to the torque box. Now we'll triangulate it through the inner and outer frame rail on this side. Now the opposite side is going to be a mirrored image. Now right through here in the transmission area, there's going to be a transmission crossmember that ties the two inner frame rails together. And that's really going to stiffen this thing up.
We're using a tried and true method of strengthening the main backbone of the frame by cutting out 1/8-inch steel plates, which will fit right into these openings. Of course, since we want them to plug in all nice and pretty, a cardboard template is a great way of achieving a good fit. Sometimes when we do this, we use that thinner style cardboard for the template making. Either one works, but today I'm just using the thick stuff and a good old box cutter. Another bonus, if you mess up, cardboard is way cheaper than the metal you just wasted. Once all the weak points are templated up, it's time to move on to making the steel version. Luckily, Trucker is pretty handy with our Shop Saver plasma table.
So we're going to go ahead and set our home position. Here is XY0. And that's going to give us our starting point based off our template to go ahead and cut these pieces out. We're going to go ahead and open up this program and start to cut these pieces out. Now I've added some holes in this program so we can go ahead and run some dimple dies in these panels to give us a little more stiffness.
Of course, most people aren't going to have access to a piece of machinery like this, but there are a number of ways to cut out your plates, including a regular plasma torch or a cutoff wheel. We're going to use our Shop Saver because we've got it, and these pieces are going to come out looking great. Well, it looks like we got a boatload of plates made. Well, we got to do a little bit of dressing on them before we can weld them on, but we'll catch you guys here in just a few.
Still ahead, our G-Machine frame gets plated up like a tank to stand up to all the abuse we can throw at it. Later on, see the suspension upgrades that are going to make this car handle like a new model.
Well, we got our pieces back from the plasma table, and these things are still worn. We've got some holes in it and went ahead and dimple dyed them. Now we just need to fit them to our frame, do a little marking so we can tweak them so they fit just right. Now what my plan is to make a mark here, and a mark say here. That way I can bend this part of it up to meet this edge right here. Now to bend this piece of 1/8 inch plate, I'm just going to use a vise and a hammer to persuade it. It shouldn't be all that big of a deal because it's such a narrow piece. I find the most efficient way to do this is to put a little bit of pressure on the metal with your hand while you're using the hammer to persuade it to bend where you want it to. Now let's check to see if this thing fits before we go too far. Give that fit a thumbs up. Now before we start getting too excited and go to welding this thing all up, we need to double check that it's sitting straight and level. If it's sitting tweaked one way or another or on an uneven surface, once you go to welding the plates onto it, you're gonna make it permanently crooked. Ain't nobody got time for that. Now I'm using this little piece of metal to keep the panel from kind of falling inside this hole. And also I use it as a tool to kind of tweak the rail a little bit to give me a perfect corner so I can lay my weld in there. Now this is that perfect little corner that I was talking about. It is a happy medium between the two panels, and I'll be able to fill them up with some weld. Make sure that your tacks are good enough to keep the piece where it needs to be. But in case you need to remove the panel, if there's a boo-boo, don't get carried away. Old trucker's gonna grab every darn C-clamp east of the Mississippi and tack this panel into the frame. He'll walk the piece around the bend here, there, and yonder using a hammer and a multitude of clamps to make it adhere to the contours of the frame. If you'll notice, the jack stands are sitting into points where the springs would normally support the weight of the vehicle, because placing them in other locations can cause your frame to flex one way or the other.
Now that we've got our original frame rails all welded up, we went ahead and built some inner frame rails, 2x3 box tubing. It's really going to add some torsional stiffness to this chassis. Now we're going to tie the back of our rails into the lower link mounts here. That way the force of the rear end gets distributed through the frame more evenly.
In addition to the 2x3 that we added, we came back in with some 1x3 and connected the inner and outer rail together. That way it gives the center of the car a tremendous amount of structure to it. Now we had to modify this brace just a bit so that it would clear the floor pans. We could have sliced them, but that's just a lot of extra work versus just notching this piece of tubing. Now we wanted these to also hang as close to the floor as possible, with all of them not hanging way out from under the car. So that's the idea, taking this plain old floppy factory frame from this to this. Now she's got way more than enough backbone to stand up to the power and stress that we're going to be putting it under.
Up next, find out why a full float rear can give you some extra toughness in the tail end. And then our frame gets the powder coating treatment. Ooh, that looks nice.
Now I said everybody was going to jump in on the Monte Carlo build. It's Ian with the Xtreme Show, and I hear he's pretty good working on these old rears. So Ian, I'll let you do your thing, buddy.
Thanks, Tommy. Now, Tommy spec'd a 12 bolt for the back of this Monte, which is pretty cool because it's going to stay with the whole theme of the car. But we wanted to step it up, make it truly hardcore because of the nature of the finished build that we're working on. So we sent the rear end out and had Moser do a full float conversion, which included installing these spindles on the end of the axle too. Now you've seen us do this many times in the Xtreme shop, and we do it to make the axle easier to service when we're on the trail. If we break a shaft, we can just simply remove the cap and pull it out. But there is a reason to perform a full float conversion when you're on the street. See, a semi-float axle, the weight of the car is actually carried by the axle shaft. On a full float conversion, the weight of the car is carried by the bearings on the spindle. That means that the shaft itself can be a lot stronger and can deflect more. That means that when it's inside that axle, it can twist. So when this car grabs a lot of traction, the axle is going to be able to twist a lot more than it would with a semi-float axle shaft. We basically have a bare housing and a pile of parts. My job now is to put it all together. The first step is to determine the thickness of our pinion shim by measuring the depth of the pinion in the housing with a pinion depth checker tool. Then the ring gear is installed onto our limited slip differential that we got from Summit Racing. Full float conversions require these axle seals that came in the kit to be installed right beside the side bearings. Once in the housing, the backlash is adjusted, and then the remainder of the Mosier full float kit can be installed. It consists of new axle shafts, new hubs, and drive flanges that will connect the differential out to the wheel. So with this rear axle completely rebuilt, now it matches the rest of the drivetrain that Tommy chose for this Monte Carlo. All that's left to do now is drop a diff cover on it, and Tommy can go ahead and give this axle housing a nice coat of shiny paint.
The next part of the drivetrain that I want to touch on is our TCI Street Fighter transmission. It's based off of a 700 R4, and this thing's been re-engineered from the front pump to the tail housing to improve performance, longevity, and strength. And it's rated up to 725 horse. You saw our training earlier when we were using it to mock up our frame mods, but now we're gonna get in depth on the transmission itself. This is old Evan with TCI Performance. What'd you bring us, man?
Well, you guys have opted for the kit. Now that includes everything you need to transfer power from the flywheel to the drive shaft. Now obviously that includes the transmission, but you also get transmission fluid, the torque converter, cooler, and an adjustable TV cable.
Well, alrighty, let's talk about a few of the key components that makes this thing superior to just a stock unit.
Let's start with the clutches. The Street Fighter uses a greater number than the stock build, and they're built out of heavier duty material. The end result, a longer life. Now, the valve body maintains constant fluid pressure and employs calibrated springs, which are tailored to how you want your transmission to shift.
They also use a 10-vein billet pump, which moves more fluid than a stock pump, keeping pressure higher and extending the life of the unit. The sprag that you find in these units is significantly stronger, which is crucial in helping the transmission handle more power. And it comes with a heavy-duty servo, which will help increase band force, leading to better shifts and prolonged lifespan.
With the TCI unit, you get higher fluid pressure, less slip, and firmer shifts with stronger parts.
Well, man, we sure appreciate you helping out. This brings us one step closer to getting the Monte Carlo back on the road.
We're not baking cookies in this oven, but we are cooking up a sweet-looking frame. Also, check out the suspension we snagged for our Chevy.
We're back, and we hauled our Monte Carlo frame back to Blast from the Past in Lebanon, Tennessee, so that they can put the finishing touches on it. Namely, one more round through the blaster to get rid of any of the remaining nastiness and clean up around the welds.
We just blast it to the raw metal, and take it out, blow it out, clean it out, wash it, dry it. Then we take it in the booth and put the powder on it.
That's right, we're opting for powder coat on this frame. Powder is tougher than paint, and due to the way it's attracted to the metal, it does a better job of protecting the inside of it as well.
Pull it out of the booth and bake it for about 20 minutes.
It takes a metal temperature of just about 400 degrees to make the powder properly adhere to the frame. And the results? Well, can't argue with that. Well, we got our chassis back from the guys at Blast from the Past, and they done one awesome job because it looks great. We're gonna go ahead and drop in our motor and transmission. You don't have to do it at this point, but it's just a whole lot easier to do. Now, as for headers, we decided to go with a set of long tubes from Doug's. These things are ceramic coated inside and out, and even with the frame modifications that we have, these things should fit like a glove. In the case of the bolts that we'll use on our headers, we're opting for a set of Stage 8 locking fasteners. Once you've attached their unique hardware, they're not going anywhere.
Now to make this car turn, we went ahead and called up Flaming River and got their complete kit. Now it includes everything from the steering column to the box.
When it comes to the box, we're going with a 14:1 ratio from Flaming River. That quick ratio will help us throw that big old Chevy into the twisty bits. And since the engine is really easy to work on right now, we're going to go ahead and plug in our Dyna4 starter from MSD. Not only does it look good with its billet mounting bracket, but it's also a high torque, high speed model that's capable of withstanding a great deal of heat and abuse. So it'll keep working well and looking good for a long time.
Our goal now is to make our chassis a roller, and to get there we're going to use some of this Hotchkiss sport suspension that we got from Summit Racing. To start with, this kit employs tubular control arms, which along with all the rest of the kit, bolt right into the original factory location. When it comes to the concept we want to dramatically improve the way this car handles, this suspension kit is the biggest piece of the puzzle. The rear upper links are adjustable, so if you need to make a few tweaks, you can, no problem. Okay. Good. Go ahead and tighten that up if you would. See ya. All in all, not a bad foundation for our old Monte Carlo second time around. And you never know, it just might be you that gets to test this revamped chassis out. If you have any questions about anything you saw on today's show, head on over to PowerBlockTV.com.